Hi, my name is Michelle Harper. I'm 30 years old, born and raised in the Midwest, and for as long as I can remember, I've always been the extra. The spare seat, the forgotten detail, the piece that didn't quite belong in the puzzle my family so carefully crafted for themselves. I work in Kansas City now, in corporate strategy. On paper, I'm someone you'd probably assume had a normal upbringing, middle class, two-story home, white picket fence, family barbecues. You'd be wrong, because in that house, that pretty, polished house where laughter filled the kitchen and holiday cards lined the mantel, I was little more than a legal obligation. An adopted daughter placed gently into a family that never truly wanted to make room for me. The only thing more painful than not having a family is having one who never lets you forget that you weren't their first choice. I remember standing outside my own front door at 7 years old, my backpack too big for my shoulders, the smell of dry leaves in the air, waiting after school because someone forgot I had piano practice. Again. I'd stare at the windows of that house, lights glowing warmly inside, where my adoptive brother and sister were playing video games or eating brownies fresh out of the oven. And I would wonder, why not me? That question followed me like a shadow. Through elementary school birthday parties where I wasn't allowed to invite any friends. Through high school award nights where no one showed up to clap when my name was called. Through every polite nod my adoptive mother gave me in public, always saying, "This is Michelle," never "my daughter." It was subtle, cruel elegance, like carving someone out of a photo, not violently, just carefully erased. I spent most of my childhood earning gold stars I could pin nowhere, smiling in photos no one framed, and speaking softly so I wouldn't bother the family I was supposed to be part of. But I never really was. Not when I got straight A's, not when I folded the laundry perfectly, not even when I cried myself to sleep in the attic bedroom, the smallest room in the house with no heating and no view. "You should be grateful," my mother would say, folding her arms when I once asked if I could move into the guest room. "You're lucky we even brought you here." Those words, lucky, burned like acid, because I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a stray dog someone adopted for appearances but never learned to love. Still, I tried. God, I tried. Every school holiday I cooked, every family photo I stood stiffly to the side, hoping to be included. Every year I bought everyone Christmas gifts, thoughtful ones, paid for with the money I made babysitting the neighbors' kids. My gifts were always the first ones left behind, unwrapped or regifted. The truth is, when you're raised starving for affection, you learn to overcompensate with good grades, good behavior, good intentions. But no matter how brightly I shined, they never looked up. The only person who ever really saw me, was my grandfather, Grandpa Joe. He lived 2 hours away on a quiet farm that smelled like pine wood and fresh bread. Summers with him were my only refuge. He called me darlin' girl, taught me how to change the oil in his old truck, and once told me, "The world can be real loud, Michelle, but don't let their noise drown out your worth." He never said much about my adoption, but sometimes I caught him staring off at nothing, his jaw tight, like he was biting back a story he didn't know how to tell me yet. Just being around him made me feel real. He's the only reason I made it out of that house whole. But even as I built a life for myself, got my degree, got my own apartment, got a job that paid me more than my parents ever believed I'd earn, that emptiness still followed me. It whispered every Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving was the one day they never forgot to remember me, or rather, remember to forget me. Every year they threw a grand dinner, big table, fancy cutlery, the whole extended family, except me. Always an excuse. "Oh, we didn't think you were coming back into town this year." "Oh, we thought you'd be too busy with work." "Oh, your brother already invited his friends, so the table's kind of full." Full. Funny, isn't it? How a table with 10 seats could never find one more for me. So last year, I did something I never had before. I planned Thanksgiving myself. I rented out a small, elegant dining room in a boutique restaurant downtown. I sent invitations in hand-calligraphed envelopes. I included everyone: my mother, father, brother, sister, and Grandpa, of course. I even prepaid the entire dinner. Turkey, stuffing, pumpkin pie, their favorites. I arrived early, dressed in a navy blue dress, hair done, makeup light but hopeful. The restaurant was quiet at first. Gentle piano music played, and the candles on the table flickered like little promises. By 6:00 p.m., the room was still empty. By 6:20, my phone was still silent. I called. No answer. Texted. No response. By 6:40, I finally got through to my mother. Her voice was as clipped as ever. "Oh, Michelle, your father's not feeling well, and we already had dinner at home. You'll be fine. You always are." And then the line went dead. Just like that. I sat there for another 20 minutes, pretending the people around me weren't whispering, pretending I wasn't used to this, pretending the tears in my eyes were from the candle smoke. When the waitress came by, she leaned in gently and said, "Would you like us to pack everything to go, miss?" I didn't answer her right away, because suddenly I felt someone's hand on my shoulder. Rough, warm, familiar. It was Grandpa, coat dusted with flurries, boots still muddy from the farm. He pulled out the seat beside me and smiled. "You didn't think I'd let you eat alone, did you?" He squeezed my hand. His felt frailer than I remembered, but still strong, still steady. And then, without saying a word, he reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, faded, yellowed at the edges. "I think it's time you read this," he said softly. "What is it?" I whispered. He looked at me, eyes full of memories and something else, something heavier. "Before you open it," he said, "just promise me this, no matter what it says, don't let it make you doubt who you've become." That envelope, it changed everything. Because inside it, I found out why my mother never loved me, why my father could barely look me in the eye, why I never fit in. No matter how much I tried to mold myself into their world, it wasn't just neglect, it was a lie, one that had been quietly kept from me my entire life, and now I had the key to unlock it all. But what I chose to do with that truth was up to me. Would I confront them? Would I seek out the woman who gave birth to me? Would I finally walk away for good? All I knew that night was this. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sitting alone. And for the first time, I was ready to know everything. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Or discovered a truth in the comments? That changed everything? Like, comment, or pass this along. Someone out there might need to hear it tonight, because sometimes healing starts with a story, and this one's only just begun. I used to lie awake and trace the cracks in the ceiling above my bed, imagining they were maps, lines that might lead me somewhere, anywhere, other than that cold little attic room. The attic wasn't meant to be a bedroom. There was no insulation, just thin floorboards and a draft that whistled through the seams every winter. But when I was 9, my mother, Ellen Harper, decided that the spare bedroom downstairs was needed for her sewing projects, so they moved me up. Just like that. No discussion, no explanation. "Michelle will be fine in the attic," she said casually over dinner, like she was rearranging furniture, not her daughter's life. And so my world shrunk. A twin mattress on the floor, a single chipped dresser, a narrow window too high to reach, no heating vent, no curtains, no warmth. But I didn't complain. Not once. I learned early that complaining only brought consequences. My mother believed gratitude was the rent I paid for being allowed to exist under her roof. "You should be thankful we took you in," she reminded me often, her eyes sharp like glass. "God knows where you'd be otherwise." She said it in front of people, too. Dinner guests, church ladies, my teachers, with a smile on her face and a tone that made it sound like a badge of honor, or a favor I could never repay. My father, Richard, never corrected her. He sat silently at the head of the table, nodding as though the statement were simply a fact. My younger sister, Julia, their biological daughter, had a room filled with pink canopy curtains, fairy lights, and walls covered in framed certificates she didn't earn. My brother, Mason, had a shelf lined with basketball trophies and a desk with a laptop they upgraded every other year. I had a hand-me-down alarm clock that blinked the wrong time and a desk lamp that shorted out if I turned it on too quickly. Still, I tried to be good, better than good. I packed my own lunches. I learned to iron my clothes. I memorized multiplication tables before any of my classmates. I volunteered to clean the dishes every night just so I could stand in the warmth of the kitchen for a few minutes before being sent back upstairs. But no matter how many gold stars I collected at school, my mother's eyes never softened. "You'll never be like Julia," she once said after I brought home a perfect report card. "She just has that natural charm." Natural charm. As if love was only reserved for the photogenic, the soft-spoken, the ones who looked good in church pews and on holiday cards. I wasn't rebellious. I didn't throw tantrums. I didn't demand love. I just kept shrinking quietly, folding myself into corners, into silence, into obedience, until there was barely anything of me left. And yet, every summer, something came back to life. The moment Grandpa's rusty pickup truck pulled into our driveway, I'd run outside with my duffel bag already packed, my face breaking into the kind of smile I only wore for him. "Ready, darlin'?" he'd ask, lifting my bag into the back like it was made of feathers. Always, always ready, because his house smelled like pine and cinnamon and freedom. He let me pick the music on the drive. He asked about my school projects and actually listened. He'd pull off the highway to show me odd little places, antique shops, roadside diners, fields with old tractors that looked like relics from another time. He'd hand me the keys to the shed, the ones he never gave anyone else, and say, "It's yours too." He never had to say much. Just being there, with him, was enough to make me feel like someone worth choosing. It was during one of those summers that I found the photo. I was 13, cleaning out a dusty corner in his upstairs study, when I knocked over a stack of old books. Beneath them, tucked into a notebook, was a photo of a woman. Blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and the saddest smile I'd ever seen. She looked familiar. When Grandpa walked in and saw what I was holding, he froze. Then slowly he took it from my hand and said softly, "That's someone important, someone who couldn't stay, but never stopped caring." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I still remember the look in his eyes, a mix of regret and protection, and the way he gently slid the photo back into the drawer without another word. That was the first crack in the story I'd been told about where I came from. A crack that widened every year until I could no longer ignore the hollow feeling it left behind. Because deep down, I knew something didn't add up. Something about the way my mother tensed when I asked if I had baby photos, the way my father never called me his daughter, the way Julia once muttered, "You're not really one of us," after I beat her in a spelling bee. I carried that photo in my memory like a secret, not daring to ask again, not ready to hear the truth. But now that Grandpa had handed me that envelope on Thanksgiving night, I realized that the truth had been waiting, just like I had. In school, they called roll alphabetically. "Harper, Michelle," the teacher would call out, and I'd raise my hand quietly, politely, while the kids around me muttered, "Here," with a confidence I could never summon. I hated hearing my last name, because every time I heard it, it echoed with a lie. Harper, the name of a family that never made room for me, a name that looked clean on paper, neat in a school directory, perfectly fitted onto a lunchbox label, but never actually belonged to me. It wasn't mine. Not in the way it belonged to Julia, whose initials were monogrammed on her towel sets. Not in the way it belonged to Mason, whose bedroom door had a wooden plaque that read, "Mason Zone, Keep Out." I never had a plaque, never had anything personalized, because to personalize something, you have to see the person first. And in that house, I was seen only when it was convenient to acknowledge me, usually in front of others, when my parents wanted to look generous or selfless for having taken in a child. "Michelle's our little blessing," my mother would say with a tight smile at church potlucks, always followed by a slight tilt of her head and a subtle tone of self-congratulation, the kind that made it clear I was more project than person. But back at home, it was always Julia this, Mason that. Julia got piano lessons, dance recitals, dresses with matching shoes. Mason got karate classes, a PlayStation, and his own TV in his room by the time he was 10. Me? I got silence. And once, when I asked if I could take art classes after school, just a trial, just once a week, my mother didn't even look up from her coupon catalog. "We're already stretched thin," she said curtly, flipping to the next page. "Besides, you already get plenty of attention at school with all those grades." As if achievement was a substitute for affection. I wasn't starving for food, not in the literal sense, but I was starving in my hands too neatly, that made me apologize when I hadn't done anything wrong, that made me clean the entire kitchen when I overheard Julia whining about the smell in the sink. My life became a cycle of anticipation and letdown, hope and correction, and I never knew which version of my mother I'd meet in the hallway each day. The sweet hostess or the cold accountant of my existence? The most painful moments, though, weren't the ones filled with yelling. They were the quiet ones. The empty seat at the table when I came down for breakfast too late, because no one bothered to wake me. The birthday morning where no one remembered until Julia made a sarcastic joke about me being almost legal, and my mom hastily lit a leftover candle and stuck it in a muffin. The Christmas I got a gift card for a clothing store that had closed months earlier, while Mason opened a brand new pair of wireless headphones and Julia got designer perfume. I held the useless card in my hand that year, nodding like it was perfect, because by then I had mastered the art of swallowing disappointment without flinching. Sometimes late at night, I'd curl up under the covers in the attic and stare at the ceiling, not to trace the cracks, but to imagine a world where I had been born to someone else, someone kind, someone who wanted me. It felt like betrayal to think that way, but it was the only thing that made the ache quiet down. And then I'd think of Grandpa, the way he rubbed my shoulder when I was sad, but didn't have the words to explain why. The way he slipped me a $1 bill for the school book fair when my mother said no because "You already have enough books, Michelle." The way he never called me adopted, not once. To him, I was simply his girl. The summers I spent at his farm were the only times I breathed freely. No pretending, no measuring my tone or walking on eggshells, no being punished with silence for asking too many questions. Just fresh air, cracked records playing in the living room, and tomato sandwiches with too much mayonnaise. There I could read until midnight, write stories with the windows open, fall asleep without bracing for disappointment. I could be me. But every August, I had to go back to the Harper house, where love had rules and warmth had a timer, back to the stilted small talk around the dinner table, back to being the blessing no one actually wanted. It was during my senior year of high school that the resentment started to settle into something heavier, something that almost felt like numbness. I had won a statewide essay competition, a big one. The prize was a partial scholarship to the university I dreamed of attending since I was 14. I came home that day beaming. The letter was still in my backpack, barely creased, like a trophy folded into paper. Julia was in the living room, painting her nails a color that smelled like sour cherries. My mom was in the kitchen, cutting carrots for a casserole. "I got it," I said, unable to hide my grin. "I actually got it." My mother didn't look up. "Got what?" she asked, dropping the carrots into a pan with a clatter. "The scholarship," I replied. "The one I told you about. The one from the state writing board." She paused, wiped her hands on a towel, and looked at me. For one brief moment, I thought she'd smile, but instead she said flatly, "Well, I hope you remember that when you're making choices about your future. College doesn't pay the bills forever." Then she turned back to the stove.
Congratulations.
As if the conversation
No
was
hug,
over. Not even a nod of acknowledgement, just carrots and indifference. I went back up to my attic room and pulled out the envelope again, reading the words over and over as if they might feel different the 10th time. They didn't. That was the night I realized something. I could earn all the trophies, grades, and gold stars in the world, and it still wouldn't be enough. Not for them. But maybe, just maybe, it could be enough for me. That was the beginning of my quiet rebellion. Not loud, not dramatic, just decisive. I accepted the scholarship without their help. I found a job on campus and started saving every cent. And when I packed my bags that fall, I didn't tell them I'd be gone until the night before I left. "I leave tomorrow morning," I said from the doorway, suitcase beside me. My mother looked up from her crossword puzzle. "So soon?" I just smiled. "Yeah, early start, long drive." Neither of them offered to help me load the car. But as I pulled out of the driveway the next morning, I didn't cry. Because in the back of my car, taped to the mirror of a care package Grandpa had mailed me, was a handwritten note. "Make the world hear your voice, darlin'. You've been quiet long enough." And I planned to do exactly that. The college campus felt like oxygen. I still remember stepping out of my second-hand Corolla, blinking against the September sun, and breathing in air that didn't carry the scent of judgment or disappointment. For the first time in my life, I wasn't someone's afterthought. I was just Michelle. No adopted, no charity case, no Harper and Whispers, just Michelle. And that, somehow, was more powerful than any degree I'd earn. I shared a dorm with a girl from Tulsa named Kiara. She had a loud laugh and a messy closet and talked about her family constantly. Her mom's famous banana bread, her dad's obsession with crossword puzzles, her 3 brothers who still fought over who got the front seat in the car. I listened with polite nods and forced smiles. I never told her about my attic room or my mother's cold stares. When she asked about my family, I just said, They're back in Missouri," and quickly changed the subject. I didn't want pity. I didn't even want understanding. What I wanted was distance. So I buried myself in books, in lectures, in student council meetings, and weekend shifts at the coffee shop on 9th and Charleston. I picked up extra shifts when I could, skipped parties, and learned how to live on $14 a week in groceries. My professors noticed me. So did my manager at the cafe. And for the first time in years, people said my name, just my name, with kindness. It felt foreign at first, like I was wearing someone else's coat, but slowly it became mine. Every A I earned was a small act of rebellion. Every dollar I saved was a step away from them. And every time I walked across that campus, I imagined that I was walking into a future that would no longer require their approval. Still, even in that freedom, there was an ache, a whisper in the quiet moments. Would they ever be proud of me? Would they even notice if I disappeared? I tried not to care, but care has a way of clinging to you when you've grown up on scraps of affection. So I kept trying, even when I told myself I wouldn't. I sent Christmas cards every year, handwritten. I called on their birthdays. I texted updates about my grades, my job interviews, the time I was selected as a teaching assistant. My mother would reply days later, always with the same 4 words: "Good job, keep going." No punctuation, flat approval, like she was checking a box. Eventually, I stopped telling them anything at all. But I never stopped telling Grandpa. He was my constant. Every Sunday, without fail, I'd call him. Sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. He'd ask about my professors, my boss, whether I was eating enough greens. He'd mail me envelopes with newspaper clippings, notes scribbled in the margins. "Read this one aloud. You always liked words." "Proud of you, darlin'. I knew you'd shine." Sometimes he'd send money. Never much, just enough for a haircut or a decent pair of boots. I always told him not to, but he'd wave it off. "I didn't get to give you birthday money all those years," he'd say. "Let me catch up." He never asked for anything in return. Only once did he ever ask me for a promise. "Don't let their silence decide your worth," he said one spring, his voice quiet over the phone. "You hear me, Michelle? You've got more light in your pinky finger than that whole house ever knew what to do with." I wrote that down and taped it above my desk. It stayed there all through senior year. By graduation, I had 3 job offers lined up. One of them was in Kansas City, the only one close enough for me to stay near Grandpa. The pay wasn't the best, but the city felt like a compromise between escape and loyalty. So I took it. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with peeling baseboards and carpet that had seen better decades. But it was mine. My name on the lease, my mugs in the cabinets, my books on the shelves. No attic, no cold silence, just space I filled with music and peace. I bought my first full-size bed, a new coat, a plant I named Nora, and I started building a life. Quietly, steadily, without applause but with intention. I never once asked my parents for help. Not when I had a flat tire, not when I needed emergency dental work, not when I had to choose between groceries and gas. I figured it out, because I always had. I worked late, got promoted, paid off my student loans faster than anyone I knew. I started consulting independently on weekends, giving businesses advice on operational streamlining and market growth. By 28, I had clients. By 29, I had a title, Director of Strategic Development. But still, every time I sent my mother a text, "Just wanted to share some good news," I got the same generic reply, "Impressive, you're doing well." It wasn't pride. It was observation. like I was a distant cousin she kept tabs on out of obligation. But still, I kept trying. That was the thing about my pain. I had learned to mask it, to perform strength so well that even I started to believe it was real. But on nights when the city lights flickered through my blinds and the silence grew thick, I'd lie on my couch, thinking about the girl in the attic who just wanted someone to say, "You matter to me." And that's why, one October evening, I did something reckless. I wrote out 6 invitations in gold ink with wax seals and planned the most perfect Thanksgiving dinner I could afford, not to impress them, not even to win them over, but to give myself the closure I never got, one last chance to create a memory that wasn't rooted in rejection. I booked the restaurant, selected the menu, their favorites, each dish carefully thought through. Turkey, mashed potatoes, glazed carrots, pecan pie. I even requested a table by the window, one with a view of the city lights, something warm, something beautiful. And then I mailed the invitations, one to each of them: Mom, Dad, Julia, Mason, Grandpa.
For once,
I wanted to include me. I spent weeks planning every detail, but in the back of my mind I knew it was a long shot, that they probably wouldn't come, that maybe, once again, I'd be sitting at a table set for 6 while 5 chairs sat empty. But I had to try. Not for them, for the girl who never asked for help, for the woman she became, the one who survived anyway. The sky was already fading to velvet when I arrived at the restaurant. November in Kansas City always carried a chill that crept beneath your coat, no matter how tightly you buttoned it. But I didn't shiver. Not that night. I had spent the entire afternoon getting ready, curling my hair in soft waves, putting on the navy blue dress I'd bought months ago but never had the courage to wear, and slipping on heels that made me stand just tall enough to feel like I could meet the night head-on. The restaurant was tucked into a cobbled corner of the historic district. Warm lights in the windows, quiet jazz playing through speakers above the ivy-draped awning. Inside, the private room I had reserved was glowing with amber candles and soft table settings. 6 plates, 6 chairs, silver napkin rings polished to a shine. I arrived 15 minutes early. The hostess greeted me by name and complimented my handwriting on the place cards. "I haven't seen something this elegant in weeks," she said with a kind smile. I thanked her, even though my stomach was already sinking. A part of me, the part that still believed in miracles, kept glancing at the doorway. Every time the knob turned, my breath caught in my throat. I imagined my mother walking in, arms folded tightly but face softened just enough to say, "We came. We're here. You matter." I imagined Julia rolling her eyes but offering a shrug. "This was nice of you, I guess." Even Mason, aloof and self-involved, clapping me on the back like I was suddenly part of the club. But none of them came. 6:00 p.m. passed. Then 6:15. Then 6:30. The restaurant's hum continued, plates clinking in the distance, low conversation drifting through the glass doors behind me. But in that room, time felt like it was folding in on itself. At 6:38, I called my mother. No answer. At 6:42, I texted Julia. "Hey, everything okay?" No reply. At 6:50, I finally called my dad, the last lifeline. He answered, not with hello, but with, "Michelle, we told you your brother's friend invited everyone over tonight. We're already eating. Hope the dinner goes well." Then a click. The line went dead. It didn't matter how many times I told myself to expect this. It still hurt. Not the loud kind of hurt. Not the kind that shatters glass or flips tables. It was the quiet kind. The kind that just empties you. The waitress came in again, her voice gentle. "Would you like me to box everything up?" I was about to nod when I heard the door behind me creak open. And then I smelled something familiar: pine, tobacco, and the faint trace of hay. Grandpa. He stood there in his weathered coat and farm boots, holding his hat in one hand, the other clutching something. A thick envelope, yellowed with age, its edges frayed like it had been handled 1,000 times. "I figured you might need a dinner companion," he said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. He walked in slowly and sat down across from me, placing the envelope between us on the linen tablecloth. "You really went all out," he said, glancing around. I gave him a sad smile. "Didn't think it'd just be us." His eyes softened. "I did." He didn't say it cruelly, this would happen, just had always known this would happen, and still showed up anyway. That alone made my eyes sting. He poured us both a glass of cider and waited until I took a sip before he slid the envelope toward me. "You deserve to know," he said. I looked down at it. There was no name on the front, no label, just old paper and truth waiting to be opened. I touched the corner of the envelope, felt the texture of it, the weight. "What is it?" I whispered. He sighed, that long, slow breath people give when they're not sure how to deliver what comes next. "It's a letter," he said, "written the day before your adoption." My fingers froze. "My adoption?" He nodded. "From your birth mother." That sentence shattered the floor under me, not because I didn't know I was adopted. Of course I knew, but because I had never, not once, been given a name, a reason, a story, just vague phrases and cold shoulders. "She was someone special," Grandpa continued, his voice rough now. "She didn't leave you because she didn't want you. She left because she had no choice. Because your father, my son, made a mistake, a terrible one." The world blurred. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear him. "My son got her pregnant when they were both too young to know better," he said, eyes cast down. "She was barely 18. He didn't step up. Her family disowned her. She had nowhere to go." My breath caught. "So I took her in, gave her a place to stay. She lived on the farm for almost 6 months before you were born. I tried to convince her to keep you, but she wanted you to have more than she could give. So she left this letter with me." "Why didn't you give it to me sooner?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He met my eyes. "Because I didn't want it to define you before you were ready." The letter sat between us like a heartbeat, and suddenly everything in my life, the coldness, the attic room, the glances, the absence of baby photos, made sense. They resented me, not because of who I was, but because of who she had been, because of what she represented, a choice they hadn't made, a burden they never wanted, a secret they couldn't hide. So they buried me under their silence instead. I picked up the envelope with trembling hands. I didn't open it yet. I didn't need to. Not right then. Because I knew what it meant. That the hole I had felt my entire life finally had a shape. And the woman I had wondered about for years hadn't abandoned me. She had loved me. Enough to write. Enough to leave something behind. Something no one else had ever given me. Not my mother, not my father, not even my siblings. An origin, a voice, a choice that wasn't shame, but sacrifice. I looked up at Grandpa. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it in every way a heart can mean something. For showing up, for holding the truth, for loving me when no one else did. He nodded, eyes shining. "You deserved more," he whispered. "But you made more, Michelle. You became more." And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of claiming my story, of confronting the family who buried it, of deciding who gets to define my worth. And I knew, no matter how painful it would be, I was going to find her. I didn't open the letter until 2 days later. I kept it tucked in my purse the entire weekend, like a sacred thing I wasn't ready to touch. Across coffee shop tables, even into bed, where I placed it on my nightstand and stared at it like it might whisper the answers without being opened. But on Sunday morning, with a cup of lukewarm coffee beside me and the early sunlight pouring through my apartment windows, I finally tore the seal. The paper was old, yellowed, and folded in quarters. The handwriting was delicate, slanted, feminine. There were water stains on the edges, smudges where the ink bled, like she had written it through tears. And it began like this: "My dearest Michelle, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if the people who raise you will give you this letter. But if it ever finds its way to your hands, I want you to know something important. You were never unwanted. You were never unloved. You were my light during the darkest time of my life, and letting you go, choosing to let someone else raise you, was the hardest, most gut-wrenching choice I ever made. But I did it because I believed it was what would give you the life I couldn't. Your father and I, we were young, we made mistakes. But you, Michelle, you weren't one of them. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." I stopped reading for a moment. My vision blurred. I clutched the pages like they were oxygen, and I'd been drowning for years. The rest of the letter filled in the gaps. She had been 19, alone. Her parents had disowned her. My biological father, Grandpa's son, had panicked and ghosted her within weeks of finding out. She was heartbroken, ashamed, and scared out of her mind. Grandpa Joe had been the only one who offered her shelter. He let her stay in the guest house on the farm, took her to doctor appointments, made sure she had prenatal vitamins and warm meals. He held her hand in the delivery room when no one else came. And after I was born, she held me for hours, trying to memorize my face before saying goodbye. I asked him to make sure you ended up somewhere safe, but I didn't know where that would be. I only knew I wanted more for you than I had for myself. If you're reading this now, my only hope is that you've grown into the kind of woman who knows her worth, even if no one ever told you what it was." She signed it. "With all the love I never got to show you, your birth mother, Claire." I said the name out loud, quietly, reverently, and the syllables filled the room like they belonged there all along. She had a name, and so did I. Not just Harper, not just the adopted one. I was Claire's daughter, the child of a girl who had nothing and still chose to give me everything she could. That letter didn't just change the way I saw my past. It changed what I was willing to accept from my future. Because the truth, the one they'd buried, wasn't a tragedy. It was a lifeline, one they tried to keep from me because it made them look bad, because it exposed their lies, because it revealed that I had never truly been theirs to rewrite or erase. But now I had it, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it anymore, not with their selective silence, not with their subtle cruelty, not with their attempts to make me feel like I should be grateful for being allowed to exist in their orbit. I had been quiet for long enough, and so, that night, I wrote a message. I wrote it as carefully as Claire wrote that letter, except mine was addressed to the people who called themselves my family. A thread that had always been used to share photos of Mason's kids, Julia's new car, and updates on my father's blood pressure. It had never once acknowledged my accomplishments, my birthdays, or my presence at all. Until now. Dear family, thank you for not showing up to Thanksgiving dinner, because in your absence, something much more meaningful arrived: the truth. I've spent my whole life wondering why I felt like a stranger in your house, why no one ever looked at me like I belonged, why I was treated like a burden wrapped in obligation. Now I understand. You didn't resent me. You resented what I represented. A decision that wasn't yours to make. A woman you never wanted to acknowledge. A truth you thought you could bury. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't stay buried forever. Grandpa gave me the letter Claire wrote before she gave me up, and for the first time in my life, I heard the voice of someone who actually loved me. You couldn't offer that, and that's okay. I've stopped expecting it. But what I won't do anymore is pretend. Pretend I was ever truly a part of this family. Pretend I owe you anything. Pretend your coldness was kindness. From now on, you don't get to rewrite my story. I know who I am now. I know where I came from. And I'm finally free. Michelle. I hit send and waited. Not because I wanted an apology, but because I wanted them to sit in the silence they had so often given me, this time filled with something they couldn't ignore: the truth. The first reply didn't come for 12 hours. I'd almost forgotten I'd sent the message, except my heart hadn't. It stayed lodged in my chest like a stone, heavy and still, beating too loudly any time I checked my phone. By the next morning, the group chat had been oddly quiet, eerily so. Usually someone would have sent a meme. Julia would have posted a brunch photo. Mason's wife liked to forward inspirational quotes with glitter fonts and passive-aggressive family values messages. But now, nothing. Dead air. And then just after 10 a.m., it buzzed. A message from Julia. Wow. Dramatic much? That was it. No mention of the letter, no acknowledgement of the dinner. Just those 3 words, as if I had written some overblown diary entry instead of confronting a decades-long betrayal. I didn't reply, not out of shock, but because, frankly, I expected nothing less. Julia had always been like that, too cool, too sarcastic, too proud of the pedestal she'd been placed on since birth. Any time I'd challenged her growing up, when I got better grades, when I won awards, when I asked simple questions like, why does she get new clothes and I don't? She deflected with attitude. Now was no different. But 5 minutes later, Mason chimed in. You could have just called if you had something to say. No need to blow up the family chat like that. Blow up? They acted like I'd lit a match, not opened a wound. It was stunning, and yet so telling. They were more offended by my tone than by the years of silence, exclusion, and lies. That in itself was proof. But what came next was the real twist of the knife. My mother replied. She almost never used the group chat. She preferred to keep her judgments in person or behind closed doors. But this time, she typed out a full paragraph. Michelle, I don't know what kind of story Grandpa fed you, but you're clearly being manipulated. That woman gave you up. End of story. We raised you, clothed you, gave you a home. And this is the thanks we get? Accusations, guilt trips? You've always needed something to feel victimized about. It's exhausting. I read the message 3 times, each sentence stinging like a slap. That woman gave you up. We raised you. Ungrateful. It was as if they couldn't even fathom the idea that I had the right to ask where I came from, to feel pain over their neglect, to desire something deeper than just shelter and polite conversation. And there it was again, that word, grateful, the word they'd thrown at me since I was old enough to tie my shoes. A weapon disguised as virtue. Be grateful for the scraps. Be grateful for the attic. Be grateful for being invited, even if you're ignored. Gratitude, in their language, meant silence, obedience, acceptance of their version of events, no matter how hollow they were. I didn't reply to her message either, because she hadn't written it to reach me. She'd written it to reclaim control, to remind me of the hierarchy, the unspoken contract that I was only ever allowed in their world on their terms. But those terms were no longer acceptable, not when I knew the truth, not when I had a name, Claire, and a letter written with more love than my mother had given me in 29 years, not when I had Grandpa, the only person in the family who actually chose me. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I worked from home, but my attention wandered. I opened documents and forgot what they were. I brewed tea and left it steeping until it went cold. Around 4 p.m., my phone rang. Grandpa Joe. I answered on the first ring. "Hey, darlin'," he said, his voice soft. I didn't speak for a moment, just listened to the gravel in his voice, the kindness wrapped in each syllable. "I read it," I said finally. "The letter." There was a pause. "And?" "She loved me," I whispered. A breath caught in my throat. "She didn't leave because she didn't care. She left because she had no other choice. She called me her light." Another pause. "I know, Michelle," he said. "I know she did. I feel like my whole life I was trying to earn love that was never going to be given. And Claire, she gave it even when she couldn't stay." "I wish I could have given it to you sooner," he said quietly. "But I didn't know when it would hurt you more, to know or not to." "I'm glad you did," I replied. "Even if it was late, I'm glad I know now." He exhaled, the sound like wind rustling through cornfields. "They won't understand," he said, reading my silence. "I know. They might never try to, and they'll blame you for even bringing it up." I closed my eyes. "They already are." Another pause. "Then it's time you stop blaming yourself for the way they are," he said. "You don't owe them anything, Michelle, especially not silence." His words weren't just comforting, they were liberating, because for years I had blamed myself. If I'd just smiled more, if I'd just stopped asking questions, if I'd just been easier to love. But love doesn't have to be earned. And families who withhold it while pretending they're doing you a favor, they aren't families, they're prisons with wallpaper. That night, I stood in my kitchen, the letter open beside a mug of tea gone cold again, and I made a decision. This wasn't just going to be a personal revelation. It was going to be a public declaration, not out of spite, but because I knew there were other Michelles out there, girls who felt like ghosts at their own dinner tables, who smiled through birthdays no one remembered, who kept quiet because they didn't know what else to do. I wanted to show them that silence wasn't the only option. Peace comes not from forgiveness, but from truth, and I was ready to speak it. The following weekend, I posted a photo. It was a simple one, just me sitting alone at that candlelit Thanksgiving table. 6 place settings, 5 untouched. My plate was half full, turkey and green beans and a small slice of pecan pie. And I was smiling, but not the kind of smile you give when everything is perfect. It was the kind of smile that says, "I survived." Below it, I wrote, Sometimes the most freeing thing you can do is set a table for people who never intended to show up and still eat with joy anyway. This year, I planned Thanksgiving dinner by myself. I invited my family. They didn't come, but someone did. My grandfather showed up, not just with kindness, but with a letter from my birth mother, a letter that changed everything I thought I knew about myself, about my past, about why I always felt like I didn't belong. Turns out, I wasn't broken. I wasn't unlovable. I wasn't a burden. I was loved deeply by someone I never got to know, and deeply seen by someone who never stopped showing up for me. To anyone out there who feels like the leftover seat at the table, please hear this. You are not the problem. Their lack of love does not define your worth. You get to build your own table, and it can be beautiful, even if it's just you and one person who never let go of your hand. This year, I found peace, not because they came around, but because I finally did. I closed my laptop and walked away without checking the comments, because I didn't post it for them. I posted it for me. But by the time I checked the next morning, the post had gone viral. Tens of thousands of likes, thousands of shares, hundreds of comments, some from strangers, some from classmates I hadn't heard from in years, and more than a few from people whose stories mirrored mine in eerie, painful ways. This hit me in the chest. I thought I was the only one. I grew up in the attic, too. Literally, I'm crying. Thank you. I've never had the words to explain the loneliness. You just gave them to me. And then, tucked in the thread, a private message from a name I had never seen before. Claire W. I froze. Hands shaking, I clicked the message. It read, "Michelle, if this is really you." I saw the post. I recognized your eyes the moment I saw the photo. Your grandfather once promised me he'd keep you safe. I never knew whether he'd keep that promise, but now I see he did. I don't want to intrude on your life. I just want you to know I never stopped thinking about you. And I have so much I want to say, if you ever want to hear it. With all my heart, Claire. I stared at the screen for a long time. Tears welled up, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense that the universe had finally allowed a circle to close. I didn't know what to say. Not yet. But I knew I would reply. I knew I'd take my time, process it fully, let my heart catch up to the truth my mind had already accepted. Claire was real. She was alive. And she wanted to know me. That was more than I ever thought possible. That was everything. Later that evening, I got a text from my mother. "So you're airing dirty laundry online now? How embarrassing." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because the woman who used silence as control finally realized it no longer worked. She could scream into a void, but I wasn't standing in it anymore. I was building something else. I didn't pick up on the first ring this time, probably out back, tending to the chickens or falling asleep in his armchair. But when he answered, his voice was as steady and warm as ever. "I think I found her," I said. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. "I knew you would," he said. "I think I'm ready," I whispered, "to meet her, to hear her story, to fill in the rest of the pages." "You've always been ready, darlin'," he replied. "You just didn't know it yet." I exhaled. It was the first breath I'd taken in years that didn't hurt. The story they gave me, the one filled with shame, abandonment, unworthiness, was never true. It was their version. But now I had my own. And it didn't end in an attic, or a cold Thanksgiving dinner, or a message telling me I was too much to love. It ended, or rather began, with a woman who had nothing but gave me everything she could, a man who never let go of my hand, and a voice, my own, finally strong enough to speak without fear. I never expected an apology. That's the thing about people who build entire versions of themselves around control. They don't unravel easily. They double down. They regroup. They rewrite history to maintain the illusion that they were always right. So when my post went viral and my inbox overflowed with strangers offering more warmth than my family had in decades, I knew, without a doubt, that someone in that house would try to take the story back, to twist it, to silence it. It took 3 days. On the 4th morning, I got an email, a formal one, subject line, misunderstandings and clarification, from my mother, not even a phone call. Just an email, written like a publicist trying to salvage a scandal. Michelle, I read your post. I must say I was disappointed in how you chose to portray the family. Public forums are not the place to discuss such private matters, especially when the truth has been so badly distorted. We never treated you as anything less than a daughter. Any perceived differences were imagined or exaggerated. You were a difficult child, prone to drama, always looking for attention. You were loved in our way. As for your birth mother, we never thought it was relevant to dwell on the past. We raised you. We provided for you. That should be enough. Please take the post down. It's hurtful and inflammatory and unnecessary. E. Harper. That last line, unnecessary. I stared at it so long I could feel my pulse behind my eyes. Not once did she say she was sorry. Not once did she acknowledge the letter. Claire. The years I spent wondering why I felt so unwanted. Not once did she admit that maybe there was another truth besides hers. Instead, she painted me, again, as the problem. The drama queen, the ungrateful child, the outsider who made things messy. And it was in that moment, more than any other, that I felt something click into place inside me. A final door shutting. She was never going to understand, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to. Admitting what they'd done, what they'd neglected, would require them to look at themselves in a mirror they spent years avoiding. And mirrors don't lie. But I had stopped waiting for their reflection to change, so I didn't respond. Not to her email, not to the follow-up text Julia sent later that night. Mom's crying. Hope you're happy. Not to the voicemail from my father, where he cleared his throat 10 times before saying, "You should have just come to us privately." I didn't go to war with them. I didn't scream or rage or try to force accountability. Because my silence now wasn't submission. I said nothing. It was power. It was the sound of me walking away, for the first time, on my terms. Later that week, I took down the place cards from the Thanksgiving dinner, the ones with their names etched in gold ink, now faded from candlelight and time. I tossed them in the trash. Except one, Grandpa's. I tucked his into a drawer. Safe, clean, remembered. The house I had grown up in didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a stage, one where I was only ever allowed to play the quiet role. But I had rewritten the script now, and they couldn't stop the show. The first time I saw her again was at Grandpa's birthday. Not Claire. That would come later. I mean Ellen, my mother, or the woman who raised me at least. It was early December, and Grandpa had insisted on something small, just dinner at his place, no party hats, no fuss. But word got out through one of my cousins, and somehow the guest list grew. And because Grandpa was still the thread that loosely held the entire extended family together, they came. I arrived early, carrying a coconut cream pie, his favorite. I'd made it from scratch that morning, using his mother's recipe from a photocopy he'd sent me the year before. When I walked into the house, I expected to feel nervous, but I didn't. The moment I saw him sitting in his recliner, cheeks flushed, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of cider, everything else faded. Until she walked in. Ellen Harper. She entered the living room as if it were hers, stiff-backed, expression neutral, wearing a burgundy turtleneck that matched her lipstick but did little to soften her presence. Her eyes flicked toward me. Not quite a glare, not quite a greeting, just a recognition, like I was a person she once knew and now barely tolerated. I looked away first, not because I was afraid, but because I no longer needed anything from her. That was the most powerful shift. I didn't need her acknowledgement, her approval, her version of the story. I had mine. She spent the next hour mingling, avoiding me while pretending not to. Julia arrived in tow, all smiles and fake warmth. She hugged Grandpa, complimented the decorations she hadn't helped with, and made sure everyone knew about her recent promotion, which, from what I overheard, was more of a lateral title change. Mason didn't come. No surprise there. He had always been good at disappearing. Still, the house filled with chatter, with toasts, with clinks of glasses and forks scraping pie plates. And for a while, it almost felt like something close to family. Almost. Until I caught Ellen watching me from the corner of the room. She wasn't angry. She was calculating, like a queen at the edge of her crumbling throne, watching the servant girl she once ignored rise beyond the palace walls. It was the look of someone who realized they no longer had power, not over the story, not over the narrative, not over me. She approached me after dessert. Grandpa was resting in the other room, a quilt over his knees and the kind of sleepy satisfaction only pie and peace can bring. We were alone near the fireplace. Her voice was quiet, crisp. "I suppose this is your idea of revenge," she said. I turned to face her. "My idea of peace," I corrected. She stiffened. "You humiliated this family, Michelle. You put our name in front of the world and framed us like villains in your little sob story." "No one framed anyone," I replied. "I told the truth, the one you spent years hiding." She narrowed her eyes. "That woman abandoned you." I stepped closer. "You gave me a room in the attic." She gave me a name. The silence between us burned like frostbite. "I was a child," I said slowly, voice trembling with decades of restraint I no longer needed to carry. "I didn't need perfection. I didn't need a mansion. I just needed a hug, a note in my lunch, a birthday card that didn't feel like a favor." Her lips parted, words nearly formed, but nothing came, because what could she say? There was no defense for the quiet cruelty of years spent withholding love. "You told me I should be grateful," I whispered. "And I am, but not for you." She flinched. "I'm grateful for Grandpa, for Claire, for the fact that I survived the silence you wrapped me in like a second skin." Her face hardened. "You've always been dramatic." And with that, she turned, brisk, composed, unbothered, but her hands were trembling. I saw them as she reached for her purse. She left without saying goodbye to Grandpa. I didn't stop her, because some exits are blessings disguised as departures. That night, as I helped wash dishes in Grandpa's kitchen, he looked at me with tired eyes and said, "She's always been proud." But pride doesn't hold up well against the truth. I nodded, and for the first time in my life, I didn't carry guilt on my way out. only clarity. The holidays came and went in a blur of quiet evenings and snow-laced windows. I didn't go back to the Harper house. There were no invitations, and I wasn't waiting for one. I spent Christmas Eve with Grandpa, just the two of us. He made his famous sweet potato casserole and burned the edges on purpose, just how I liked it. We sat by the fire, watching black and white movies while the snow fell like forgiveness outside the window. And in that silence, I found something I never had in that old house: peace. Not the fake kind, the kind people perform in front of relatives or use as a cover for control. This was real. It was quiet and soft and didn't need explanation. I was finally home, not because of a place, but because of a person. That night, I gave him a gift, a framed photo of me at the Thanksgiving table, the one where I sat alone, smiling. But this version had a second photo next to it, the two of us, taken later that same night. I was holding the letter. He was holding my hand. Below it, in gold script, I'd written, "Thank you for never letting go." His hands trembled slightly as he held it. He didn't say much, just cleared his throat and whispered, "I'm glad I lived to see this." We sat in silence for a long while, not the awkward kind, but the kind where nothing more needs to be said. After the New Year, I got another message, this time from Claire. We had exchanged a few tentative notes since the post, nothing deep, just careful questions, updates, small pieces of memory unwrapped like fragile gifts. But this time, she asked if I'd be willing to meet. She was going to be in Kansas City for a few days, visiting an old friend, she said, someone who had stood by her when she was 19 and scared. "I'll understand if it's too soon," she wrote. "I just thought maybe you'd want to." I stared at the message for a long time, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I was finally ready to say it aloud. Yes, yes, I wanted to meet the woman who gave me life. Yes, I wanted to hear her voice, see her eyes, smell her perfume, find all the little threads that tied us together through time and distance and love left unwritten. We agreed on a cafe, neutral ground, warm lighting, wooden beams, a place that smelled like honey and home. When I walked in, I recognized her instantly. Soft lines at the corners of her mouth, hair clipped in a neat style that framed her face. But her eyes were mine. And when she stood up, unsure whether to hug me or reach out or say something clever, I crossed the space between us and embraced her. Her body trembled as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But I didn't cry, because I wasn't sad. I was full of everything I never got and everything I was finally reclaiming. We sat for nearly 3 hours. She told me stories about the farm, about Grandpa's quiet strength, about the little things she remembered about holding me, the smell of my baby shampoo, the curve of my nose, the way I fell asleep with my fingers wrapped around hers. "I think about that every night," she said, eyes glistening. "That moment, letting go." I squeezed her hand. "You didn't let go," I said. "You left love behind." She covered her mouth, trembling. Outside, the snow began to fall. Inside, something settled in me, something that had never known rest. After we parted, she didn't ask when we'd meet again. She didn't pressure, didn't assume. She simply said, "Whenever you're ready, I'll still be here." And for once, someone actually meant it. A week later, I got one last letter from Grandpa. He had written it during the holidays, sealed it in an envelope, and left it in his desk drawer. just in case. The note was short, but it said everything. Darlin', if you're reading this, it means you found your way. You turned pain into a path and silence into a voice. I'm proud of you, more than you'll ever know. This world's got enough people who chase applause. Be the one who chases peace. I love you, always. Grandpa Joe. He passed away 2 weeks after that, peacefully, in his sleep, the kind of passing a man like him deserved, quiet, holy, wrapped in a life that meant something. We buried him on a Friday morning beneath a gray sky. I gave the eulogy, not Ellen, not Richard, not Julia or Mason. Me, because I was the one he chose, and in the end, that mattered more than anything else. At the reception, no one from the Harper family spoke to me, but it didn't sting. Not anymore, because I wasn't standing in their shadow. I was standing in my own light. That spring, I planted a tree behind Grandpa's farm. Claire joined me. We didn't say much, just pressed our palms into the soil and let the roots carry everything else. And as we stood there, I realized something. Sometimes, family isn't who raises you. It's who shows up for you. It's who answers the call when no one else will. It's who tells you the truth when everyone else is hiding. And sometimes, it's who comes back, even after years of silence, to say, I never stopped loving you. Spring came late that year. The snow lingered too long, as if the cold wasn't quite ready to let go. But when the thaw finally came, it was gentle, like an apology whispered into the earth. That's how healing felt too, slow, quiet, surprising in the places it bloomed first. I didn't rush it. I didn't try to stitch a happy ending too fast or pretend everything was perfect now that I'd found Claire and said goodbye to Grandpa. Instead, I let life come to me in fragments. I returned to the farm more often. It wasn't just Grandpa's house anymore. It was a place of memory, a sacred archive of all the small kindnesses that kept me alive when love felt scarce. Claire met me there one weekend. She brought old photo albums she'd kept boxed for years, things she couldn't bear to look at,
out on the kitchen
but couldn't
table,
throw away, where Grandpa used to read the newspaper every morning. There were pictures of her as a teenager, long blonde hair, that same hesitant smile I had in all my school photos. Photos of her holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket, eyes swollen from crying, but hands cradling me like I was the most precious thing she'd ever touched. This one was taken the morning I left, she said, tracing the edge of the photo. I didn't ask why she didn't run, why she didn't try harder, why she didn't call, because I didn't need to. Sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it's what you give up, not what you hold on to, that says everything. I wanted you to be loved, she said quietly. I didn't know then that love without truth isn't love at all. I reached for her hand. She squeezed it like she had the day we met in the cafe. That was the moment I realized she didn't need to prove anything. She was mine, and I was hers, not by blood or legality, but by something deeper, choice. And choosing each other after all this time was more powerful than anything I could have dreamed. That spring, I invited her to stay at the farmhouse for a weekend. We fixed the broken porch swing, repainted the shutters, hung wind chimes from the rafters. It wasn't just restoration, it was resurrection. A place once defined by absence and loss had become something else entirely. Home. And not long after, I made a decision. I left the city. I packed my books, my dishes, my 2 succulents, and that photo of me and Grandpa at the Thanksgiving table. And I moved back into the farmhouse, not to run from the world, but to build one I actually wanted to live in. I kept my consulting job, but I started doing something else, too. I opened the barn once a week for a little writing circle. People came, not many at first, but enough. Women who had stories they hadn't told, men who still carried questions about where they came from, young people who were searching, older people who had stopped searching long ago. We sat in a circle and read letters we never sent, poems scribbled on napkins, journal entries written in the dark, and I shared mine too, not for sympathy, but because stories lose their shame when spoken aloud. One night, a woman, maybe 50, with a soft Texas accent, stayed after everyone left. "I read your post months ago," she said, eyes misty. "I thought, if she could speak, maybe I can too." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, because that was the life I was building now. Not one where I chased recognition, but one where truth could bloom, where people could find their voices in the ashes of silence, where chosen family wasn't just a phrase. It was a room full of strangers willing to tell the truth out loud. It was early June when the letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, a real letter, handwritten, mailed in a beige envelope with slightly smudged ink and a familiar looping script, from Julia. I sat with it for 3 days before opening it, not because I feared what it would say, but because I'd already moved so far beyond their words, it felt strange to let them back into my hands again. Still, curiosity is a funny thing. So on a Saturday morning, with the sky stretched wide and still above the farmhouse, I peeled open the flap and unfolded the paper. "Michelle, I don't know what to say anymore. I guess I'm writing this because it feels like everything exploded and none of us know what's left. I was mad at first. Then I thought maybe I realized I didn't actually know your side at all. I just knew Mom's version. And when I tried to remember the last time we ever just talked, like really talked, I couldn't. I don't know if we'll ever be close. Maybe too much has passed. But I want you to know something. I see now how we failed you. I didn't speak up when I should have. I let Mom shape the way we saw you. I let her tell us you were difficult, ungrateful, dramatic. But maybe you were just hurting. And maybe I was too blind to see it. I'm sorry. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to hear that. Julia. I read it twice, then folded it and placed it in the drawer with Claire's letter. Not because I was ready to reconnect, not yet, but because those words, however late, however fragile, mattered. They didn't undo anything, but they marked something new, recognition. Not from a place of pity or guilt or obligation, but from a crack in the armor. And sometimes that's where the light gets in. That summer, Claire came out to the farm more regularly. We planted wildflowers behind the barn. She brought seeds. I brought soil. We planted marigolds for resilience, lavender for peace, and forget-me-nots for the girl I once was. Every Saturday, we watered them together. One morning I found her standing among them, arms folded loosely, sun painting her hair gold. "You've made something beautiful here," she said softly. I smiled. Didn't do it alone. She looked at me, really looked, and tears welled in her eyes. "You have your own light now," she whispered. "Not borrowed, not begged for, just yours." And she was right. I no longer needed anyone's permission to belong. I had stopped shrinking to fit a narrative that never included me, stopped contorting myself to earn a seat at a table built on silence and performance. Instead, I built my own. At that table, there was room for the broken, for the honest, for the ones who spoke even when their voices trembled, for the women who raised children they never got to hold, for the men who remembered birthdays no one else did, for the ones who chose love, not out of obligation, but from the simple, holy act of showing up. That's the family I found. That's the legacy I carry. One night, as fireflies blinked above the fields and the wind rustled the tall grass like an old lullaby, I sat on the porch and wrote something in my journal, a final note, not for them, not even for Claire, but for me. You are not a mistake. You are not what they didn't give. You are what you chose to become. And that is enough. I close the journal, close the chapter, not with bitterness, not with rage, but with peace, because the girl who once stared at cracked ceilings and wondered if she mattered now stood beneath a sky wide enough to hold every version of herself, and she no longer needed a roof someone else had built to feel at home. And if you've ever felt like Michelle, like the quiet one, the overlooked one, the guest in your own story, I want you to know you are not alone, and your truth matters. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you'll ever do. Sometimes peace looks like building a new table, even if you set it for one. If this story touched something inside you, if you saw a piece of your past, your pain, your silence, or your power, take a moment, leave a comment below and share your story, even just a line. Like this video if it gave you strength. Subscribe for more real stories of quiet victories. Somewhere out there, someone is still sitting in the attic, waiting to hear that their voice deserves to be heard too. And maybe your words will be the light they need.